In the 12th century, monks recorded a ritual unlike anything else in Christian exorcism. They did not banish demons into the air, nor drive them into animals. They tried to trap them. Clay pots, ordinary vessels of water and grain, were turned into prisons. The monks chanted, pressed wax seals over the mouths of jars, and buried them beneath monastery floors. Chroniclers wrote that some jars rattled as if something struck from within. Others grew warm to the touch. The monks called them the silent guardians, vessels that must never be broken, never unearthed. Centuries later, masons repairing cloisters have stumbled upon these jars. Some smashed by accident, some sealed so tightly the wax still clings like blackened skin. No one agrees on what escaped, or if anything did. The manuscripts left one warning, repeated again and again: never open the pot. So here is the question that lingers beneath monastery ruins. What did they really seal, and why were the jars buried where men still prayed above them? The ritual begins in silence. Monks gather in a circle, a clay jar placed at the center like an altar. They chant not in Latin, but in fractured syllables, words borrowed from older tongues, scraps of Greek, fragments of Hebrew, sounds with no clear origin. These syllables are written in manuscripts that still exist, though few dare to read them aloud. The instructions are simple. Speak the chant until the air grows heavy, then drive the spirit into the jar. Accounts from the 12th and 13th centuries describe these exorcisms as warfare. A monk would confront the afflicted, someone writhing, foaming, clawing at their own skin. They pressed a jar to the lips or chest of the possessed, chanting as the others tightened their circle. The victim's screams echoed inside the clay as if the pot itself was drinking them in. When the body stilled, the jar was sealed with wax, marked with the sign of the cross, and taken below ground. Burial was essential. To leave the jars above was to invite disaster. So monks hid them beneath cloisters, cellars, or cemetery earth, layering stone over them as though covering graves. Chroniclers wrote of abbots warning, "Disturb not the vessels, for within them lies restlessness." Archaeologists in France and Germany have unearthed some of these jars. Many are broken, their contents indistinguishable from dirt, but some remain sealed, their wax hardened like black stone. What disturbs researchers most is not what is inside, but what surrounds them. Soil near certain jars shows signs of burning, as if heat had leaked from within. In others, shards of pottery hum faintly when handled, as though echoing a vibration too low for the ear. One manuscript from Trier Monastery details a disaster. A novice, doubting the ritual, pried open a jar to see what lay inside. He collapsed within hours, his body twisted, his mouth blackened. The monks resealed the pot and buried it deeper, writing in the margin, "The demon would not leave him. It clung to the jar until the seal was set again." That novice's name was erased from the monastery roll, as if he had never existed. These accounts were not isolated. In Spain, Benedictine monks described whole cloisters lined with buried jars, a labyrinth of hidden prisons beneath holy ground. Some abbots treated these vessels as sacred, part of their duty to keep darkness confined. Others regarded them with terror, fearing they had not contained demons, but multiplied them, each jar a fragment of something too large to control. In 1892, masons repairing a cloister in Burgundy uncovered 3 jars beneath a collapsed wall. 2 shattered instantly. Workers swore they smelled sulfur and rot, though the clay was empty. The third remained intact, sealed with wax hardened like coal. The abbot ordered it reburied without inspection. His notes, still archived, read only, "We dared not." In the 1970s, a team excavating near a monastery in Catalonia found shards bearing faint inscriptions. The symbols matched no known script, yet when pressed to the ear, one fragment produced a faint hiss, as though air moved inside despite its breakage. The shards were catalogued, then lost in transit to a museum. Rumors claim they were taken by clergy. Historians debate whether these rituals were symbolic or literal. Some suggest the jars were metaphors for discipline, teaching monks to externalize evil. But such explanations collapse against physical evidence. Jars deliberately sealed, buried in patterns, surrounded by soil, altered as if by heat. And always the warning, "Do not disturb." Manuscripts across orders echo each other with unsettling precision. Seal it as you would a wound. Bury it as you would a corpse. Pray above it, lest it remembers you. These are not metaphors. They are instructions. They reveal a network of monasteries engaged not in metaphorical exorcism, but in containment, an underground map of vessels stitched beneath Europe. And still, the most chilling truth is this: not all jars remain buried. Some have entered private collections, passed through hands unaware of what they hold. Auction records list sealed earthenware vessels, monastic origin, purchased without explanation. Where are they now? Whose homes sit above jars never meant to be opened? The monks left behind more than jars. They left words, cryptic, broken, scattered in manuscripts across Europe. These fragments are all we have of the binding ritual, and together they form a picture that is less about exorcism than negotiation. One text from Regensburg speaks of persuading the spirit to drink. Another from Cluny warns, do not shout, speak as if bargaining. These lines suggest the monks did not simply force demons into clay, they coaxed them, convinced them, manipulated them into entering a vessel willingly. The jars were prisons, yes, but prisons entered by trick, not force. Theological debate followed. Some abbots argued the ritual bordered on heresy. If monks bargained with demons, was that not collusion? Others countered that Christ himself allowed demons to enter swine, so why not clay? The dispute grew so fierce that manuscripts were copied in secret, hidden in margins, and disguised as ordinary prayers. One abbot wrote, "We guard men by deceit, for the deceiver must himself be deceived." The fragments also reveal fear not of demons alone, but of the jars themselves. Marginal notes in multiple manuscripts warn, do not keep the vessel near your bed. Do not sleep above it. If it speaks, add wax. These warnings suggest that the jars were not inert after burial. They leaked presence. They whispered. Monks lived their lives above cloisters, humming with sealed voices. One chilling record survives from Canterbury. A monk wrote of hearing tapping beneath the floor during evening prayers. At first they thought it mice. Then they heard words, Latin syllables twisted into mockery, chanting along with them. The abbot ordered the floor ripped up. They found a jar split by root growth, its seal broken. The chronicles do not record what followed, only that the floor was rebuilt with stone twice as thick. Even the construction of the jars was debated. Some insisted on simple clay, unglazed, porous, earthy. Others demanded glazed jars, believing the smooth surface held spirits more firmly. Recipes survive. Clay mixed with ash from burned psalms, clay kneaded with holy water, jars fired in silence without a word spoken until cooled. These details show that the monks treated pottery not as craft, but as weaponry. Archaeological finds confirm this. Several unearthed jars bear etched crosses around their rims. Others have fragments of Latin prayers scrawled on their bases, as if inscriptions might strengthen their hold. One jar discovered near Cologne was sealed not with wax, but with lead poured into its mouth, as though ordinary means had failed. Further evidence comes from heretical sects who imitated the practice. In Bohemia, wandering friars were accused of carrying jars filled with storms. Locals testified that they rattled like thunder when shaken. When the friars were executed, the jars were smashed before the crowd. Chroniclers record that a wind tore through the square, scattering stalls and banners. The incident was written off as coincidence, but the rumor endured. In Sicily, peasants adapted the ritual into folklore. They buried jars at crossroads, claiming the vessels trapped wandering spirits and protected villages. Some were found centuries later, etched not with crosses, but with crude images of faces screaming. The church denounced these as pagan, yet the practice spread, showing how the idea of binding evil in clay seeped into popular imagination. Other manuscripts hint at the consequences of mistakes. One text warns, if the chant falters, the vessel drinks you. Another, if wax melts, do not touch the mouth. Such lines imply danger not only in opening jars but in creating them. Failure meant the binder became the bound. Several necrologies, lists of monastic dead, contain entries with no cause of death, only the note, sub terra, under the earth. The persistence of these fragments across regions suggests coordination or perhaps shared fear. Why would monasteries in England, France, Spain, and Germany repeat the same ritual unless they believed they were answering the same threat? And if it was only superstition, why hide it so carefully? Why protect it even from inquisitors? Silence implies not doubt, but terror. And here lies the darkest fragment of all, a line found in multiple copies, in Latin that resists translation. Roughly rendered, it reads, "The jar does not contain, it remembers." If true, then each vessel was not merely a prison, but a witness, a memory of what it held. And when broken, it does not release what was sealed, it recalls it. To break a jar, then, is to make the past present again. That is why the manuscripts agree on one thing above all. The ritual was never meant to be permanent victory. It was delay, stalling, holding darkness in earth until men forgot. But earth shifts, stones fall, and forgotten things rise. Every age rediscovers what others tried to bury. The monks may have sealed their jars beneath cloisters, but time and human curiosity have never been reliable guardians. Again and again the vessels surface, broken by accident, uncovered by builders, stolen by collectors. And each time the stories that follow deepen the mystery. In 1623, workers restoring a chapel in Rouen uncovered a cluster of jars under the choir stalls. 6 were intact, sealed with wax and pressed with faint crosses. The abbot overseeing the work ordered them destroyed, declaring the practice superstition. When smashed, the jars released nothing visible, but chroniclers record that half the workforce fell ill within days. They coughed, raved in delirium, and spoke in voices not their own. The illness subsided only after the abbot led days of prayer. The jars were reburied, the accounts sealed in diocesan records. 2 centuries later in Bavaria, farmers digging foundations for a barn uncovered another buried cache. This time they ignored the warnings etched faintly into the clay. Latin words repeating, "Claudite os," close the mouth. One pot was cracked open. The farmer's son later described hearing whispering from the shards, though he insisted the words were in no language he knew. That same season, the family's livestock died without cause, their carcasses showing no wounds. Neighbors began to speak of a curse. The remaining jars were smashed, though villagers claimed the whispering persisted for weeks. In 1914, British soldiers stationed near Ypres reported stumbling into the ruins of a medieval cloister while digging trenches. Among the rubble, they found several small jars sealed with hardened wax. Exhausted soldiers joked about captured devils and smashed the pots. Diaries tell of a low scream that seemed to hang in the air even after silence fell. Within the week, the unit suffered bombardments that killed nearly all of them. Official history records only enemy shells. The journals remain quietly archived. Modern archaeology has faced its own unease. In 1998, excavators beneath a ruined abbey in southern France uncovered a jar still sealed. It was transferred to a laboratory for analysis. The report, later leaked, described anomalous readings, heat emanating from the vessel, though it was cool to the touch, magnetic fluctuations when instruments drew near, and an audible hiss when microphones were placed against the clay. Before tests could continue, the jar vanished from storage. The investigation into its disappearance produced no results. What makes these accounts disturbing is not the events themselves. Illness, misfortune, accidents can always be explained away, but their consistency. Across centuries, across regions, every time the jars are broken, something follows. Whispers, sickness, sudden deaths, always accompanied by an effort to reseal, rebury, or deny. Legends grew alongside discoveries. In Poland, villagers tell of the black jar found near an abandoned monastery. They say the man who opened it began to see figures standing at the edges of his fields at night, watching but never approaching. His family fled, his house fell into ruin. Children dared each other to touch the jar until it was finally buried again by priests who muttered the old words from manuscripts thought long lost. In Italy, a rural tradition persists of marking unexplained ruins with the phrase, "Non toccare I vasi," do not touch the vessels. Few villagers today know why, but the warning endures, a folk memory of monastic practices forgotten by the wider church. Even collectors whisper. Auction records sometimes list sealed monastic vessels, with notes that buyers later refuse delivery. One private collector in London reportedly fled his home after keeping such a jar in his study. He told associates that it hummed at night, vibrating faintly, and that he once woke to find the wax seal sweating as if the jar were alive. He sold the property and vanished. The jar's current location is unknown. The church itself wrestled with these rediscoveries. Bishops alternated between condemning the jars as superstition and quietly ordering them reburied rather than destroyed. This contradiction reveals something important. Even skeptics hesitated. If they truly believed the jars were empty, why not shatter them all? Instead, they were placed back into the earth, as if some instinct, older than doctrine, warned them that disturbance was worse than ignorance. Consider the account from Toledo, 1734. Records describe a mason repairing a cathedral wall who struck through into a cavity containing 2 sealed jars. He carried one home as a curiosity. Within days, his wife reported he had stopped speaking altogether. He sat motionless in a chair, lips pressed tightly, refusing food. When finally forced to open his mouth, his tongue was black, as if charred. The jar was retrieved by clerics and buried under the cathedral steps. The mason himself was interred beside it. Even in the Enlightenment era, where reason was championed, whispers about these vessels persisted. Philosophers in France speculated whether the jars represented a primitive form of psychological projection. But reports circulated of sealed jars in private salons, displayed as curiosities that guests refused to approach. One diarist noted, though they mocked the notion of demons, none dared break the wax. The 20th century added another dimension, science. Laboratories examining fragments reported anomalies, subsonic frequencies, electromagnetic spikes, inexplicable warmth at the rims. Skeptics argued this was faulty equipment, yet multiple teams in separate nations described the same results. The jars resisted analysis, as though the act of measuring agitated whatever lay within. Perhaps the most haunting detail comes from testimonies of workers themselves. Again and again, those who uncovered jars, whether in monasteries, battlefields, or farmlands, spoke of a presence. One soldier near Ypres wrote, "When the jar broke, it felt as if someone new had entered the trench, though none could see him." A farmer in Bavaria claimed that after his family cracked a vessel, he could hear his own name whispered from empty corners of the barn at night. Archaeologists who excavated in southern France in the late 20th century recorded similar experiences. A young assistant swore that one jar shifted slightly on its own, despite the soil around it being compacted for centuries. Another claimed his dreams filled with chanting in a language he did not understand. These accounts were omitted from reports but circulated quietly among scholars. And so the jars accumulate not only history, but a mythology of dread. They blur the line between superstition and artifact, between folklore and evidence. Each discovery forces the same question. If these were only symbols, why do they still inspire terror in those who touch them? If they are harmless, why are they reburied instead of displayed? The monks may have believed they were trapping demons, but perhaps, unknowingly, they created something worse, a chain of belief, a contagion of fear that amplifies with each rediscovery. If terror itself is a kind of binding, then the jars do not merely hold what was sealed inside, they hold us. They ensure the ritual continues, century after century, through our own refusal to break the silence. Now imagine this: countless monasteries abandoned, countless ruins unexcavated, countless jars beneath the soil, each one a mute question sealed in clay. And with every stroke of a spade, every renovation, every careless accident, another question is raised to the surface. One day, perhaps, all of them will be found. And then, what will the earth sound like when every jar begins to whisper at once? The chronicles focus on those who opened jars, but equally haunting are the accounts of those who lived near them and survived. Survival did not mean safety, it meant carrying something that never left. Monks who buried jars beneath cloisters wrote of unease that lingered above. Choirs sometimes broke rhythm as if following an echo no one admitted to hearing. Brothers complained of dreams repeating, nights where they saw clay mouths whispering beneath the floor. Some begged to be transferred to other abbeys, yet wrote in their new homes that the dreams followed them. In 1821, a French scholar studying ruins in Champagne recorded that villagers refused to live in houses built over cloisters. When pressed, they admitted to hearing scratching beneath their floors at night. One farmer swore his animals avoided a corner of the yard where a jar had once been unearthed, circling it endlessly, but never stepping inside. He eventually bricked the space over and abandoned the property. Collectors, too, reported consequences. A 19th century antiquarian in Vienna displayed a sealed jar in his study. He wrote that it never moved, yet each morning the wax appeared slightly different, as if reshaped by unseen fingers. He grew paranoid, refusing to enter the room alone. Friends later testified he had stopped speaking entire sentences, breaking off mid-thought, as though interrupted in silence. After his death, the jar vanished. More disturbing are reports of language itself being affected. In Spain, villagers near Montserrat whispered of children who began to repeat phrases in Latin they had never been taught, echoing words inscribed on jars excavated nearby. In England, a rector who oversaw the reburial of vessels noted that during sermons, he could not help but pause at certain words, as if compelled to emphasize them. His congregation later described his voice as two voices speaking at once. The burden extended even to soldiers. One in World War II wrote of sleeping in an abbey near Normandy. He claimed the floorboards vibrated faintly as though someone tapped from below. Weeks later, he was found wandering, speaking an unknown tongue. His diary ended with the line, "The jar is not asleep." In rural Italy, oral histories preserve stories of families who inherited monastery land. Generations later, children still refuse to drink water from clay jugs, saying they can taste voices in it. These tales persist even when no jars are present, as though memory itself has been contaminated. The survivor's burden is not easily dismissed as hysteria. Too many accounts describe the same symptoms: whispers beneath silence, dreams that do not fade, words that seem to teach themselves. These effects echo the monks' warnings that jars are not silent even when sealed, that they leak their contents like smoke through cracks. What escapes may not be a being, but an influence, a rhythm of thought that clings to those nearby. And perhaps this is the burden itself. Not possession, not haunting, but infection. The jars leak ideas as much as presences. Those who survive carry echoes that bend their speech, their dreams, their silence. They become unwilling keepers of the ritual, guarding secrets they do not understand, unable to share them without spreading further. When viewed as isolated events, the jars are curiosities. When traced across centuries, they reveal a pattern, one that suggests humanity has been circling the same danger without realizing it. From medieval cloisters to modern excavations, each generation finds, opens, fears, and reburies. The cycle is precise. The monks warned, never open. Villagers whispered, never touch. Collectors muttered, I dared not. The words change, but the command endures. It is as if the jars themselves enforce the cycle, drawing attention only to seal themselves again. Folklore strengthens the pattern. In Ireland, ruins are called the houses of jars, where children are told not to step. In Romania, vessels unearthed near monasteries are still reburied with small prayers, even when no one remembers why. Across Europe, clay retains a reputation of unease, echoing mouths that should not speak. The jars also fit a broader lineage. Mesopotamian tablets describe spirits sealed in containers beneath thresholds. Jewish tales speak of remains hidden in clay. Arabian fishermen told of bottles opened on beaches, releasing beings of fire. These parallels suggest the monks were not inventing, but echoing something older, a universal instinct to bottle the uncontainable. Modernity magnifies the risk. In 2015, workers restoring a monastery in Portugal uncovered sealed jars and refused to open them. The photos briefly circulated online before vanishing. Official reports mention only ritual vessels of uncertain purpose. Locals insist priests reburied them at night. Elsewhere, construction crews whisper of singing pots that vibrate faintly when struck, though no sound escapes. Technology spreads the danger further. Once a chant was confined to parchment, now fragments are uploaded, scanned, shared. Linguists reconstruct syllables as academic puzzles, unaware they are repeating instructions once whispered only in cloisters. Audio reenactments circulate online. Some listeners report nausea or strange dreams. Dismissed as suggestion, yes, but so were the monks' warnings. The pattern is unavoidable. Containment, rediscovery, disturbance, reburial. Each cycle grows shorter, each rediscovery closer to the present. The jars are not fading into history, they are converging on us. If they are prisons, too many will be opened at once. If they are memory, then memory itself is nearing completion. And perhaps that is the final truth. The jars may never have been about demons escaping. They may be teaching us, patiently, century by century, how to finish the ritual the monks never dared complete. It began in cloisters where monks whispered over clay, sealing jars they swore contained more than earth. It continues now, in archives, museums, ruins, and whispered stories that refuse to die. The ritual was meant to protect, but protection built on concealment is always temporary. What is buried waits. What is sealed remembers. The warning repeated through manuscripts was simple, never open, and yet men open, by accident, by disbelief, by curiosity. Each time consequences followed, illness, whispers, silence that thickened into madness. Survivors carried burdens as though the jars had not stayed underground at all, but had followed them home in thought and dream. Perhaps that is the cruelest truth. The jars do not need to break to do their work. They need only be known. Awareness is itself a crack. To hear of them, to imagine them beneath stone, to wonder what lies inside, that is all ready to touch the seal. And so the cycle is not only physical but mental. Monks fear jars under their cloisters. Villagers fear jars in their fields. Scholars fear jars in forgotten archives. And now you know of them too. You carry the warning. You picture clay sealed with wax, dark soil pressing around it, whispers waiting. That image is part of the ritual's survival. Think back to the cloisters where this story began. Monks pressing wax into soft clay, hands trembling as chants echoed through stone halls. They believed the act brought peace, that each jar buried beneath their feet was a victory. Yet centuries later, what do we find? The jars still rise, the whispers still spread, the cycle repeats. Their peace was only borrowed, never earned. If every opening releases not just a presence but a memory, then each crack is a reminder. Knowledge itself may be the curse, carrying the ritual into new minds, new tongues, new ages. Once heard, the warning cannot be unheard. It lingers, repeating itself like a chant. And now you have looked. You have joined a chain that stretches back 9 centuries. The question is not whether you believe, but whether belief matters. The monks wrote, "The jar remembers." Perhaps what they meant was this: once you think of it, the ritual is already inside you. So as you leave this story, listen. In silence, do you hear scratching beneath the floor? In your sleep, will the image of a sealed mouth of clay return, waiting to open? These are not accidents. They are inheritances. The ritual does not end with monks, villagers, or scholars. It ends when silence ends. And silence, like wax, always cracks.